All right, so good afternoon and welcome. Thank you to those of you who are joining us again for another of our monthly BioBites, and welcome to those of you who have not yet joined us. We're glad to have you. Just a quick introduction for those of you who may not know us at the Marian Institute. We are an educational nonprofit, and a lot of our work surrounds issues relating to health, particularly around food security, nutrition security, but fundamentally health in wanting access to health and health for all. And so we offer these programs the first Tuesday of every month for free. And so we're happy to have you here. And each time we hope that you leave with more information to help you shape your outcome with respect to your own health and health outcomes. Today, we're very happy to have once again, Dr. Martin Hart from the Biologix Center for Optimum Health in Franklin, Tennessee. Dr. Hart and his colleagues do phenomenal work, especially around issues of Lyme disease, which I know affects many people and many more these days as ticks are inhabiting more and more acreage across North America. And so we cannot wait to hear what Dr. Hart has to say. I'm going to turn it over in a moment. Before I do, just quick reminders to please make sure you remain muted so that we have as few disruptions as possible. It is technology, so goodness knows that it might happen. And if it does, we hang tight and we work through it. But if you could help us in that way, we'd appreciate it. And a last reminder to those of you, actually two more, sorry. We do record these sessions. We will make them available on our website 1 week from today. And again, they're free and you're welcome to share them with anyone you think might be interested. And these are past recordings. And lastly, if you have questions, we will leave time for Q&A at the end. So you can go ahead and just put your question in the chat box. We will keep our eyes on that and make sure to try to get in as many questions as we can. All right, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hart, and Dr. Hart, I will go ahead and pull up your slides here.
Great, thank you. All right. So like Katie said, I'm Dr. Martin Hart here at the Biologix Center. And today I want to talk about the fiber optics of Lyme disease. So we'll switch the agenda here. So I want to talk about the human fiber optic network. I want to talk about light in the human body, our DNA, light as a Lyme disruptor, and assessing and treating the light fields of the body. So let's go into the human fiber optic network. So just like the TV companies and the internet companies, fiber optic cables, they carry that information for us, right? That's what makes internet speed so fast nowadays. If you've heard of like Google Fiber or AT&T Fiber, those are fiber optic networks carrying that data in the form of light. So your computer and the internet, they utilize those vast amounts of knowledge through that system. So you can access so much information because of those fiber optic networks. Now, what's really neat, or a neat idea to think about, is what if there's a system that allows us to tap into that same type of knowledge regarding the human body, right? We know that in the human body is so much wisdom and information about what's going on at any moment. So what if we could tap into it? And as you can see in the slide, it turns out that there is a way to do that. And so the human fiber optic network, just like our fiber optics for TV and the internet, it's connecting our whole body. So it spreads out throughout the entire body. It connects all of our cells and our DNA so they can communicate with each other. Now they communicate with biophotons as the medium. So just like the TV and the internet use light, photons to carry your TV show, our cells and this fiber optic network use biophotons to communicate with each other. Now the technical term for this is the crystalline matrix of the human body, or the liquid crystalline matrix. So it connects our extracellular matrix, which is made up of connective tissue and fascia, which is almost like a liquid crystal in nature. And then it connects with the cytoskeleton of every cell and then embeds it down into the nucleus. So the picture I have here is the true picture of a cell. So a lot of times in human biology or chemistry class in high school, you get a picture of the goo blob, which I might even have later in the slide, in the slideshow. But it looks like the stuff with just a bunch of floating things in it. But that's not accurate from a physiology standpoint. So you can see the cytoskeleton spiraling out of the cell membrane, and then you can see the cytoskeleton coming in and attaching to the nucleus where the DNA is. So that intricate system attaches all cells together from head to toe, inside out. Okay, so your DNA from your eyeball is in communication with your toenail. It's quite interesting to think about it like that, but that's how quick that communication system is, speed of light, literally. And so you can see the diagram here is from James Oshman's energy medicine textbook. But you can see the diagram that kind of maps out how intricately networked out this system is, this crystalline matrix. So again, how does this light system work? Okay, so when we look at light in the human body, I'm going to give you a very, I call it in this slideshow, easy, gentle, and brief physics lessons. I don't want to overwhelm you by any means. So in the universe, there's 4 fundamental forces, right? We have gravity, weak and strong, magnetic forces, and then electromagnetism, okay? Electromagnetism pervades the entire universe. It's what holds our atoms together. It's what gives most physical objects their properties, right? The reason a ball bounces is because of the electromagnetic field, how bright a light is, all of that. And it governs all chemical processes. Now, what's really neat is I'm not just talking about the human body here. I'm talking about the universe, right? So the electromagnetic field does that throughout the entire universe, at least as far as we can measure. And so this is from a physics textbook, but the electromagnetic force is responsible for practically all phenomena one encounters in daily life above the nuclear scale, with the exception of gravity, right? So when you open a door, flip a light switch, move a muscle, all of those things are governed by electromagnetic force. Let's go to the next slide. So in school, when you were learning about these forces, you may learn about visible light spectrum, right? So you can see how the visible light spectrum has a certain amount of wavelengths in that electromagnetic spectrum. So in this small spot, there's visible light, and then we can go all the way from a very extremely low frequency, they call them ELF, electromagnetic forces, all the way up to like gamma waves, okay? And everything in between, X-rays and all of that is on the electromagnetic spectrum. And what we learn is that there's a little bit of it that's light. And then you may know that a photon, or maybe I'm telling you for the first time, but a photon is like a particle of light, okay? It's the smallest measurable unit of light. And so when you actually look at the entire spectrum of electromagnetic forces, the whole thing uses photons to function, right? When you get an X-ray, those are actually radioactive photons hitting you, okay? Extremely low frequencies, like from the human body, or even like radio waves or microwaves, those are all using photons to make that happen, light molecules. So it means that every interaction on that scale is actually a light interaction. So it means light is literally the entire electromagnetic spectrum. It's all light. It's just not all visible to us, right? So technically that full spectrum is the light spectrum. And I'll tell you why this is even more important on this next slide. So in the human body then, what we understand is it's light that is holding us together. It's light that is the major model of communication in the body. And it's light that governs all the chemical processes in the body. And so Professor Fitzalbert Popp, who's a major researcher in energy medicine and the biophotonic world, he says, we know today that man essentially is a being of light. Now that's kind of cool if you slow down, because you're thinking how many religions talk about us being light beings, right? But from a physics standpoint, it is very true, okay? That entire spectrum, everything holding your atoms together, making the exchange of energy, the exchange of communication and signals and hormones and all of that, it's all light all the time. Let's go to the next slide. So where DNA comes into this is that where these biophotons, these light molecules come from, a lot of them is DNA. DNA is the body's main biophoton emitter. It transmits, receives, and stores information in the form of biophotons. You can almost think of it as like where the internet is coming from major servers all over the world. Your DNA all over the cells are the servers that are then supplying the internet, the data from the internet to the rest of the communication network. So it's like a beacon constantly broadcasting this organizing field via light. Let's go to the next slide. So you've got a good primer now on how our fiber optic network in our body works, how we are beings of light and use that light as a communication network and to govern everything. But what does that have to do with Lyme disease? Well, let's look at that right now. So Lyme is a major light disruptor. So Lyme spirochetes or Borrelia, they're also living organisms, meaning that they use light just like we do. Remember I said it's everywhere in the universe is how these principles work. So they'll use light to communicate with other Borrelia. So you can see in the picture here, all these spirochetes in the picture are communicating via light. They can use it to form communities, whether that's with other Borrelia spirochetes or other co-infections. They can use it to find food, to evade danger. That's that key point of the evading danger. That means they're evading your immune system and they're evading the treatment you're doing. And they're using light to do it. And they can use light to change shape, to change into cyst form, to form biofilms and to morph their antigen structures so they're hard to detect, which is also why it's hard to get a good Lyme disease test because they're always changing themselves. So let's look at it a little bit more in the next slide. So one of the other big things that Lyme disease does or Borrelia does is it's a collagen consumer. It loves to eat collagen. This is where a lot of people end up with Lyme arthritis or muscle pain, things like that, is because it's out there just nibbling it down, okay? And so most of the crystalline matrix uses the different types of collagen as its substrate, right? It's the basis of it. That's what's forming the fiber optic network, is a lot of that collagen. So you can almost think of this, and it's an analogy I'll use more as we go along, but you could think of this as rats eating the power lines outside, right? So you have Borrelia inside your system eating the power lines of your fiber optic network. So if you can't get power to your house, it affects everything. And the longer you have that happening, the more things it affects, right? So you can't get your heating, your cooling, your refrigerator is going to go out. You can't cook, your internet, your phone. The longer those things happen, the worse it gets. You know, in the long run, the way we design houses now, if there's no heating and cooling system, the wall paint and the wallpaper and the paint's going to peel. The drywall is going to start to have mold infestation. All these things are going to start to accumulate over time as this happens. So Lyme does the same thing. The longer it has a chance to disrupt this fiber optic network, to eat the power lines, the more it's going to affect everything within it. Let's go to the next network. Next slide. So as we understand that, it can kind of help us, okay, now that we know that Lyme's going to disrupt this massive network, and it's even worse than a power line because power lines just bring energy into your body, but that fiber optic network, it's governing all these things. It's what controls it and runs it. It's almost like if we were to have a smart house, which there's a lot of EMFs, so we won't go there, but imagine you had a smart house where everything was ran by electricity and a computer, and then you lost that field. Slowly but surely, the rats ate more and more of those power lines. That's what's happening in our body with Lyme. They're eating more and more of those power lines. So we need to look at how can we assess and treat the light fields of the body to deal with this issue. So I'm going to talk about 4 things in basically diagnosing or assessing and treating light fields. Number 1 is a form of biofeedback we use called biospectral emission sequencing. Number 2 is a therapy we've developed here at the center called UROPHOTONIC therapy. 4 talks about how we're going to deal with the rats, right? Clearing Lyme disease. And 5 is how do we deal with the mess they made, healing the crystalline matrix. So let's start with the biospectral emission sequencing. So biospectral emission sequencing is an adjunctive diagnostic and treatment selection form of biofeedback, right? So it allows us to assess what's going on in the body and then select treatments that are frequency match the body. So it's a system that was developed here at the Biologix Center, and it allows us to gain valuable data from that crystalline matrix. We're essentially tapping into that fiber optic network and getting information from it. Now, what's important here is that it's real-time information, right? Blood labs, which we use here, thermography, all different forms of testing, there's snapshots, which are important and helpful, right? But we want to gauge, as we're giving treatment, we want to gauge how the body's being affected. And that's what's key with biospectral emission sequencing, right? And what's kind of built in that name is bio, meaning the body, spectral, meaning the electromagnetic spectrum or the photonic spectrum, emissions, meaning what's getting emitted from the body. So we're wanting to look at the photon field that's getting emitted from the body and then sequence it so we can figure out what's going on, okay? So again, it's giving us real-time information so we can understand what's going on and then what do we want to do about it. So I kind of talked earlier, what if you can tap into that field? This is how I tap into that field. I'm essentially gathering data from it in real time. Let's look at the next slide. So kind of to recap a little bit, the human body has a light field that carries data from every cell in the human body, including our DNA. We can tap into that field using this form of biofeedback to assess the function and support the body in dealing with issues. So the key here, though, is that we can frequency match the remedies, right? We're not using cookie cutters. We're not saying you have Lyme, here's this remedies, or this is often good for that. We're saying, are these frequencies matching up? Are what you're emitting, is what's in your light field matching up to the treatment I'm trying to give you? And this is super helpful because you guys know this if you have Lyme disease, it's pervasive, right? It's dealing with multiple organ systems. It's affecting your entire body. Your entire life is being affected. It could have co-infections involved, toxins, and it's interacting with your bio-individualism, right? Your biochemistry, which is unique to you. And so to offer a cookie cutter approach, to offer something that's not unique or not matched to your frequency, you've probably seen this. It's going to be hard on you, right? You might tolerate one thing and not another. And so I put in here, instead of using a cookie cutter protocol, we can assess your data within your light field and understand what's driving your issues and then frequency match the correction. Let's go to the next slide. So another way we do that or drive that further is neurophotonic therapy, right? So all of these systems within your body are connected, but how can we drive that further? How can we also discover how are you utilizing each individual spectrum of light and then support you in that? So neurophotonic therapy was developed by our founder here, Dr. David Jernigan. And his quote here is to facilitate restoring the optimum integrity of biophotonic transmissions throughout the body's crystalline matrix. Basically, I want your fiber optic network to work better, right? And neurophotonic allows us to do that. So if you have problems with your internet, let's say, and you call up your internet company, you say, hey, my internet's not working well. What they're going to do is they're going to run diagnostics on that network. They're going to push data through your connections and then see what happens. So they're going to push information through it. And they're going to say, okay, does it slow down? Where does it hit a glitch, right? And so with neurophotonic therapy, we're doing that same thing. We're going to use your neurological system with your eyes, which is the major photoreceptors in the body. And I'm going to push different colors in and see, using biospectral emission sequencing, how your body responds. So this is allowing us to test not just the communication network and the organization fields, but also how you utilize energy, how light acts as a nutrient, how it affects your neurological system. And so we start with colors like red, green, and blue, which are the main photoreceptors of the eyes. And then we work into some mixtures. And so you kind of think of this as stimulus response. Stimulate the body with the color, see how it responds, and then try to rebalance it out. Now, what's been neat about this for me is I've had different issues show up that didn't otherwise show up. So for one instance, I found a patient, she, under the influence of blue light, there was some Bartonella and biofilm frequencies that never showed up before, okay? Now with any other testing, now with my testing, but with the blue light, we pushed that almost like a fiber optic diagnostic through her brainstem, and it popped up. That led to a profound shift. She was already starting to do a little better, but once we were able to actually address that, a lot of her like mental health issues, her neurological issues like tremors and spasms and muscular movements, fasciculations and adrenal surges and things like that, suddenly it all made sense, and we were able to start dealing with those things directly. And I wouldn't have found that without you assessing the light field this way. So it's been a fantastic tool for us. So that's one way to deal with the light field. Let's go to another next section here. Okay, clearing Lyme disease. How do we get the rats out of the power lines? So when you start to address this, one of the first things you have to do is, if you're going to heal it in the long run, you got to get the rats out of the power lines. You're going to keep replacing the power lines, but they're going to keep eating them, right? So I kind of stick with this analogy here. You can set rat traps. In a treatment perspective, this might be antimicrobials, herbs, things like that. You can get some house cats, right? That's like rebuilding and supporting your immune system. You're going to keep it away. You can remove their food sources. So from a humanistic perspective, you can make dietary changes, fasting, elimination diets, making sure you're not feeding them the foods they love. You can eliminate the entry points. How are they getting into your house to eat the power lines? So that's like in bioregulatory or biological medicine, which the Merit Institute does a good job of spreading the message on. That's what we call it, restoring the terrain, right? Rebuilding the body itself. And then you got to clean up the rat poop, right? So you got to get rid of you got to get rid of the inflammation and the toxins. You got to take some anti-inflammatories, do some detox work. So however you decide to do that, you want to do it in a way that works for you, okay? And I'm not necessarily saying you want to do it in that order. Your body's going to have a certain order it wants to do it in. We call that a priority, right? You got to figure out your body's order of operations. But regardless, you want to make sure you're covering those bases. Let's go to the next slide. So I call this my biological medicine flow chart. And that's how I explain my biological medicine process to patients, right? So your body is a system. It's a fiber optic network, right? And there's input coming in. There's data coming in. Now that could be food. It could be water, the air you breathe, the thoughts you think. Lots of things you can control and lots of things you can't, right? You can control what food you eat, but you maybe can't control the pollution outside or the EMF field that's, cell tower that's half a mile away from you that's creating a problem. But regardless, there's input coming in. When that input comes in, your body has to process that information. So let's say you're eating and you eat an apple, take a bite, right? You start chewing. Your body immediately is starting to process information saying, how much starch is here, how much sugar, etc. And then when it does that, we'll go down to the next step and you can see it's going to create a feedback loop. So it's going to create a feedback loop to your stomach, your vagus nerve, your pancreas. It's going to say, okay, we need this much stomach acid. We need this many enzymes. And so it's going to hit your systems, your organ systems, and try to regulate them to adapt to the input. And if you can't adapt, you get health. You digest the apple, you get a little healthier. Okay, let's go to the next slide and see where we run into problems. So if we add a little bit of stress to a healthy system, right, you're okay as long as you have the resources to deal with it. So let's say it's not an apple, but you decide to eat a donut. If you're relatively healthy, that little bit of stress can probably be okay. You can still adapt to it, okay, because you have the resources to deal with the stressor, okay? But over time, if you continue to eat that way, let's go to the next slide. That stressor gets way bigger, okay? And now you're starting to deplete your body's resources because now it can't deal with that. Your pancreas starts to shut down. Your cells start to get insulin resistant if eating the donuts instead of the apples. And so now you can adapt. We call that a maladaptation. You end up with disease and eventually disease, maybe type 2 diabetes, heart disease, metabolic syndrome, right? So the flip side of this can happen too. Maybe one of your structures within here, your information processing, your feedback systems, your organ systems, maybe they have a small dysfunction and under small stress, they're okay. But the second you add a slightly bigger stress, they start breaking down. Regardless of which area it's from, this is how all disease starts to manifest, okay? There's a breakdown somewhere here. Either you overwhelm the system or your system breaks down. So what I call each one of these kind of label the different types of systems we use. So input, if you're going to deal with input from a biological medicine systems perspective, you're going to say that's kind of like lifestyle and environmental medicine. Do I need to change my diet? Do I need to change my mindset? Do I need to look at my environment? Do I need to look for mold? Okay, get an air purifier. What do I need to do to change the input? And then from information processing, we're going to look at things like energy medicine, laser therapy. We're going to look at homeopathy, change how our body's processing that information. Feedback loops are going to be similar things, but also you're going to add things like functional neurology, humming to stimulate the vagus nerve. How are you changing the feedback in the body? Do you need to chew more? Do you need to take deep breathing? Do you need to go for a walk after meals? All those sort of things. Organ systems regulation are going to come from things like functional medicine and Chinese medicine that look at the different systems within the body. And so as you're doing that, we're starting to restore the body's ability to adapt and taking away some of the stressors. So now it can heal and shift from this disease model back to a health and adaptation model. All right, so that's how I explain biological medicine. So when you're dealing with Lyme disease, this is the approach I'm going to take. I'm going to prioritize those problems and how to get the rats out. And then we're going to deal with it through this system. Let's go to the next slide. So if you're starting to do that, and now it's time to heal the damage the rats have done, right? You got all these chewed up power lines, you got the holes in your drywall, all this sort of stuff. Now you got to clean it up. So we've got to heal the crystalline matrix. So with Lyme disease, you want to support all this collagen damaged tissue. So there's a lot of systems you maybe want to support that the Lyme disease is affected, but we're going to focus on the connective tissue, the cell membranes and DNA, which makes up the crystalline matrix. So let's go to the next slide. So how do we heal the connective tissue? And that's what you're seeing behind the screen. This is a slide of a cell culture of connective tissue all connected in, kind of like I showed you on that other graph. So what's really important for our connective tissue and collagen is silica, boron, manganese. Manganese is one of the nutrients that Borrelia eats a lot of. A lot of bacteria and parasites eat iron. Borrelia eats manganese. So something to think about there. Vitamin C is very important for fibroblast health, zinc, copper, your electrolytes. Electrolytes are really important for balancing the acidity and alkalinity of your extracellular matrix. So having a good blend of minerals and electrolytes early on is important. And then collagen peptides. You know, there's a reason that our ancestors used to really chew on the ends of those bones. You want to get all that collagen and good connective tissue. Supplementation like glucosamine, chondroit, MSM, aloe vera are all very healing. Structured water. So the fiber optic network is a strong structure, right? That crystal. And so structured water helps to restore that information structure that I'm trying to create. A lot of times when you filter the snot out of your water, it's dead, right? There's no structure to it. The structure's been destroyed. The minerals have been taken out. So you want to restructure and remineralize any water that's been heavily filtered, distilled, reverse osmosed. You want to restructure and remineralize that. Hyperbaric oxygen chambers can help heal those connective tissues. Manual therapies like massage, tissue-assisted things, chiropractic can all help. Laser and other frequency-based treatments. I've seen great results with laser and healing connective tissue. And magnets, because they're going to restore that field and that structure back and balance that acidity, that pH. So those are some great approaches you can take and look into. And again, you want to, you know, this isn't necessarily medical advice for you, but it's something you may be interested in learning about. So let's go to the next one. So restoring our cell membranes. So your cell membranes, because you saw on the one slide where all that cytoskeleton is connected, it's very important for them to have that integrity with all those transport proteins and basically the sensors they have on there. So you need healthy fats. Your membranes are mostly made of fats. You want a good blend of omega-3 to omega-6s. You need both, but most of us are omega-3 deficient. Phospholipids like phosphatidylcholine and serine and enthoalamine. And there's so many different ones, but you want a blend of those phospholipids. Good healthy cholesterol, right? Grass-fed butter, ghee, from good animal fats, things like that. You want good healthy cholesterol to make those membranes. You don't want the membranes to be too stiff, and you'd also want to be too floppy, right? So omega-3s and phospholipids make them a little more fluid, and then the cholesterol helps stabilize it. Okay, you want to eliminate toxic fats, things like trans fats, rancid fats, fats that have burned and overcooked. So like olive oil is a great fat, okay? You don't want to cook with it, okay? And you especially don't want it to be smoking if you cook with it. You're just burning it up and it becomes a toxic fat that your cell membranes have to integrate, you have to detox out. And then again, structured water, because around the cells, water in our system is like a fourth phase of water that gets structured, and infections and toxins, all sorts of things disrupt that. And so we want to restructure it again. Okay, let's go to the last one in DNA. Okay, so DNA repair. So if you've had infections, lots of antioxidants, lots of toxins, that DNA can get denatured, it can get damaged, okay? So that means all the information that's emitting, those biophotons it's emitting, might not have a good start. So antioxidants are of prime importance to clear that free radical damage. You want to support proper methylation, which is really important for talking to the DNA. You need B vitamins, zinc, sodium butyrate is really important for DNA health. Some other options that are a little less broad but could be helpful for you: curcumin, berberine, quercetin are all very good at repairing DNA damage. Okay, so those three methods, we want to look at connective tissue, we want to look at the DNA, and we want to look at the cell membranes as we're starting to heal what those rats did to our power lines, right? As we're starting to heal our fiber optic network from that Lyme disease, we want to make sure we're addressing each one of those. Let's go to the next slide. So before I go for questions, I want to recap a little here. We saw how the entire body and the universe is governed by the electromagnetic spectrum, which we now know as the light spectrum, right? We know that it's involved in communication at light speed. It's involved in governing all of our chemical processes. It's involved in allowing cell-to-cell communication. And we have a fiber optic network that moves those biophotons that's made up of our extracellular matrix, our connective tissue, our fascia, our cells, and our DNA. And it connects us head to toe, inside out, okay? Everything is connected via this system. And then we also know that Lyme is a light disruptor within that system. So number one, it has its own light system it's using. And then number two, it's literally eating our power lines like rats, okay? So when we go to start dealing with that, we need a way to tap into that vast information of knowledge that our body has to offer. And so we use a form of biofeedback called biospectral emission sequencing. And we want to run further tests on it and treatment using neurophotonic therapy. And there's other options in that realm, but that's what we use here and developed here. And then we want to make sure we get the rats out of the power lines. We need to clear that Lyme disease. And then we want to heal the damage the rats did, right? We want to heal that crystalline matrix. So as you can see, when you have Lyme disease, it's vastly important that you respect and address this fiber optic network because it's influencing everything you're doing. Hopefully that was helpful for you, and I'm happy to take some questions now.
Dr. Hart, thank you very much. I'm gonna just, let's see, spotlight. All right, I'm gonna catch up with, just take a quick peek because I know there's some activity in the chat box. I'm gonna pull that up so I can pay attention. All right, back up. Okay, I'm so glad I see some questions in there. So I'm gonna start with ones that were submitted ahead of time. And then I'm going to come back to the ones in the chat box. So again, if a question comes to mind, please feel welcome to go ahead and add it. But I'm going to kind of take them in an order here. All right. First question that was submitted, going back to last week, is someone who has had Lyme, has tested positive for Lyme, and been on 3 weeks of doxycycline, and is asking whether ongoing symptoms can be intermittent.
Yeah, so, doxycycline is a good early intervention. Research on it proves that over time, it's not that great of a direct Lyme treatment, but that's for another lecture. So what you could have done is knock down the load, number one. And so the symptoms become more intermittent as your body's starting to adapt better. And then number two, though, doxycycline is never going to deal with the damage. Right? It's only working to clear the rats. You got to deal with the damage they've done, the 2 power lines now. So that's kind of that second part of the end of the lecture there, where how do you heal the damage they've done? Yeah. Very
good. Okay. I've got a few questions about light in relation to people's experience of Lyme. One individual asked if a vision exam with eyes dilated when on a heavy dose of doxycycline for Lyme disease could have further exacerbated and damaged vision and cognition, really.
Yeah, so, at that moment, when you're treating them directly, especially with antibiotics, because once the antibiotics hit the system, they're sensing that, and they're immediately going to defense mode, right? They're using their light-based systems. And so they're going to head to whatever area is going to feel safest. When you dilate those systems, when you dilate those pupils, you're basically telling the body to shut down its defense mechanisms there and let me examine you, right? That's why they do it. They want to basically make you vulnerable for moments so they can see deeper, which makes sense. I wouldn't say never do that, but doing it in a vulnerable state like that, where you're in the middle of a warfare, that's kind of like, let me stop and do a surgery on this soldier right on the front lines. So you're going to pull them out of the battle and try to do the surgery. Well, you were in the front lines while you're doing surgery, basically. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to run to that vulnerable area. So it's definitely possible to have that issue.
All right. And similarly, the next question is talking about someone who's had Lyme and is no longer able to multitask as they used to do. There's in their perception is that there's a permanently altered connection between eyes, vision, brain, cognition, and visual processing. They're asking whether this might be related to the Lyme, and if there's anything they can do. I think you've touched on this a little bit, but go ahead and respond to the question.
Yeah, Lyme neuritis and optic nerve neuritis associated with Lyme is huge, and I've had a lot of patients deal with it. It's not always permanent, and the body's amazing at making adaptive pathways around it. Okay, and so I've seen sight restored, and sometimes we're not able to bring it back all the way, but it's a partial restoration and things like that. But it's again, it's about healing the damage, making sure you're clearing the Lyme, and then doing some specific functional neurological exercises to help support those different neural pathways is big there too. So doing some brain retraining, doing different light and eye tracking exercises are going to be big. And just making sure you really squash that inflammation, that neuroinflammation. Maybe look at things like skull cap or lion's mane are going to be huge.
I want to talk really quick about time, because I know a lot of people kind of live with Lyme ongoingly. Perhaps it hasn't been eradicated, the bacteria hasn't been eradicated, all these things. Is there a window of time in which the body's kind of beyond repair, or is there always this hope of repairing the damage that's been done?
On some of the different body systems, like the nerves, especially the closer the nerves are to the brain, if there's damage that's been done for, let me back up and say this. Let me say something different. If you've got intermittent periods of improvement, if you've got windows of improvement, the likelihood that you can reverse it is much higher. Reverse a particular symptom is much higher. Okay, so if my vision's terrible, but I get spurts throughout the week where it's pretty good actually, or decent. Okay, that means there's viable tissues there that can be restored. Okay, so that's the one thing to keep in mind. The longer something's been happening, the more tissue damage is done. But especially around the neurological system, you can make neuroplastic changes around it. You can either heal some of those nerves, or you can get the body to wire around it in order to get some of that function back.
Okay. Out of curiosity, in that same vein, we had a conversation really recently talking with someone whose child was affected by Lyme years ago. And, one of the things that they experienced was a change in mood. Is that something that you often see in patients as well?
Oh, it's huge, especially with neuroinflammation. You get that neuroinflammation going, you can get, what they call Lyme and Bart rage and agitation, obsessive compulsive, oppositional defiance disorder. All of that can come, depression, anxiety, almost looking manic depressive. Huge amounts of that come out of when, especially Lyme and co-infections, are either directly infecting or inflaming the brain. Oh yeah.
And so then taking age into account and the plasticity of the body and the brain during childhood, and going back to that last question, thinking about time and the ability to do repair, is a child who experiences Lyme better able to overcome those symptoms with time because of their youth and the evolution of their body, or does the same kind of rule of intermittent versus static symptoms?
No, they're way more able to repair. Their stem cells are much younger and much more plentiful, right? So that's a factor. They haven't had as much other stuff going on. So they haven't had as much time to have free radical damage. They haven't had as much DNA damage done. They don't have as many toxins accumulated, things like that. So they're, in the clinic, pediatric patients respond much faster. They get more complete healings. They, come back from more severe cases. Sad to say, but it's just the truth, than older patients. But that being said, there's always hope for the older patients as well. I've seen miraculous things for patients in their 70s and 80s, but it's just easier with a younger case.
Very good. Okay. Another individual asked about home-based light devices and lifestyle practices that can benefit those who have Lyme and are not able to reach you in your offices in Franklin, Tennessee. Are there any? I know you kind of had some things that you listed, but specifically maybe more on the light-based therapies. Are there things people can do at home?
Yeah, number one, sunlight. Getting time in the sun is going to be huge. And even if it starts with small exposures, getting time in the sun, that's going to be our best source of it. Eating a rich color of fruits and veggies, because they're going to have all those different pigments, which are going to be light molecules, right? Giving off different light molecules. Red light therapy is fantastic. So there's different ones. There's the V light that goes in the nose. There's different red lights you can get. Those are great. There's the home laser treatments, the low level laser for the home, which is fantastic, or LED lights. There's the vitamin D, low EMF vitamin D beds. And then even I've had a lot of patients have great results with the seasonal affective disorder lights, the kind of bright lumen lights that people use when they're in low sunny areas and they get sad in the winters. They get seasonal affective disorder. So those are all great options for home use.
Thank you very much. A couple additional questions that I had time, then I'll turn to those in the chat box. One individual, I think this is probably a common experience, had been diagnosed with Lyme and put on antibiotics for a number of years. This person, both oral and IV, but they've got recurring symptoms, and I think their perception is that Lyme rarely gets killed off. I think there are probably a lot of people who go on that round of doxycycline and are so-called cured of their Lyme, but kind of live with symptoms that suggest that perhaps it's not been cleared. What guidance do you have for people who either experience those ongoing symptoms, or perhaps they had improved, but then somewhere down the line things come back? What would you advise of that situation?
Yeah, so for most antibiotic research, at best we can probably clear 85% of the bacterial load in that direction, which to some degree is somewhat okay. And from a biological medicine perspective, the key is you're almost getting it to go into like a devolved state. And this is from really Swiss biological medicine research, but you want it to go into a devolved state so it's not a big factor. And then you need your terrain to be healthy enough that it can accommodate a few weeds. Okay. What happens in like our yards and our gardens is we spray this, and you guys, Mancy does a really good job educating us, but we spray the snot out of them. We kill the soil, we kill everything in it. And then we wonder why weeds keep growing, right? Well, it's because you're giving them the opportunity. But if you've got a robust garden, 1 or 2 weeds in there is not going to ruin it. Okay. And you might even find some use for it. And so the human body is the same way. If you've built the terrain up, if you have a robust garden in there, the rest of the flowers and the plants are going to keep those weeds in check. It's the same thing with Borrelia, right? Or Lyme. You want your immune system and the rest of your microbiome to keep it in check once you get the load down low enough, right? And so it's okay to have the occasional rat as long as your house cat's going to go find it. And so that's the idea with that therapy. Now, the secondary aspect too is we've been doing some research, and you can see on our website, we have some published research where it's starting to look like we're able to eliminate from certain populations in entirety the Borrelia. Okay. This is still, we've only done one research round on this so far, and you can read up on that on our website, but that's another avenue to look at there. The other key is, if you're just doing antibiotic therapy, it's a solo therapy, it's a monotherapy. You're missing all those other things we were talking about, right? Are you dealing with the cytokine cascade that they're creating? Are you dealing with the toxins they're creating? Are you dealing with the damage they've done on the body? Are you dealing with the co-infections? And so if you're not addressing all of those in a holistic and systematic way, then yeah, the systems are going to linger, or even the bugs might linger because you're just giving them a good spot to go, right? You're not fixing the entry points. You're not taking away their food source. And so they might just move from one spot to the other. So I would say, are you addressing it completely? And then are you looking at other options to address the Borrelia directly?
Beautiful. And you mentioned some publications on your site. Thank you, Liz. Just posted a link to the Biologix Center for those of you who might be interested in visiting that site, whether to kind of explore their offerings or those publications more specifically. All right, last question submitted ahead of time, and then we're going to turn back. Actually, I have two, but one is this person asked about optic neuritis and any strategies to support healing or cure and that kind of inflammation. I wonder, with all that's been said so far, if your strategies would be any different for that than what's already been discussed now.
No, it'd be very similar. The approach I'd say would be very, very similar, kind of what I already addressed, and just looking at a lot of very different focused herbs and approaches that would bring down neuroinflammation is the biggest thing. Bring down neuroinflammation.
Thank you. Okay, the last question on this list was from someone who has experienced incidences of biofilm in the bloodstream, and it keeps popping up places. So I know this is a little different than our topic of light today, but related in that it's all related to Lyme. Any guidance you can offer this person for how to address biofilm in the bloodstream?
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, a couple options on that front are making sure first, before you go messing with biofilm, that you've got a plan in place. You don't want to just stir the hornet's nest and not be ready. Number two, there's multiple options to look at. You can look at different biofilm busters like proteolytic enzymes or broad spectrum digestive enzymes. There's a lot of essential oils and herbs that are both biofilm busters, like they break it apart, and there's penetrators, okay, ones that kind of dissolve and leak into it. So those are all options there. Eucalyptus, NAC, proteolytic enzymes, EDTA, that sort of stuff. Don't just go about it willy-nilly, but those are options. And then third, you want to address any microbes that create biofilms quite heavily. Heavy metals, candida, protomyxoa, all those things are strong biofilm creators. And so you need to deal with you want to just deal with the spider web, you want to deal with the spider itself too.
Great. And for those of you who are not able to join us back in March, Dr. Hart was our guest then and spoke on the bioenergetics of Lyme disease and kind of covered some different aspects of the disease than we've covered today. So for those who might be interested, you can visit our post-events resources page. It is on our Biomed resource library page. It's a little buried. You can also email me. I'll get you the link. Bear with us because we're working on some web updates to make that more accessible, but that talk is available. It's also on our YouTube page. All right, now in earnest, going back to the chat box. All right, bear with me. I'm just reading. So I'm assuming that this is someone who has experienced Lyme. And they're wondering if glucosamine might have an adverse effect, and may recall that zinc made head and eyes worse. Do you have any feedback or reaction to that?
So glucosamine is strong sulfur, like glucosamine, chondroitin, MSM are strong sulfur donors. So some people are going to have a hard time tolerating that. And then sometimes taking it too early, like that order of operations, taking it too early, is going to try a repair process when there's still, it's like laying electrical tape over the rats, right? It's too early in the process. So what I would say is, number one, are you sulfur sensitive? Number two, is it the wrong time?
Okay. And then that same individual had asked also about vocally toning each night before sleep, so that the brain doesn't have, as they say, these small explosions. Is there anything that you can say about this or any feedback to that?
Vocal toning a lot of times is a vagus nerve aspect. And so it's really trying to modulate the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic versus sympathetic. I would say looking at anything that's going to help, you could do other vagus nerve exercises, humming, vocal toning, singing, deep breathing, brushing the back, like very lightly gagging yourself. It sounds terrible, but brushing the back of your tongue is a good vagus nerve stimulation. CES device is one we use at the clinic that stimulates the vagus nerve. It's a little electro stimulation. So anything like that, meditation, prayer, tapping, all those things are going to be great ways to modulate that autonomic nervous system.
Excellent, thank you. We have one participant who sent in a question ahead of time. They wanted to know whether it was asked. That was the question about being on doxycycline and having a vision exam. Yes, we did address that, and so just know the recording will be posted next Tuesday, and if you wish to go back, we can revisit it there. All right, moving on. Another question: is there more than one type of Lyme test, and if so, which is the most accurate?
There's a ton of Lyme tests out there: ELISA, Western blot, PCR testing. What we use most often, and this is just for Borrelia, okay? But if we want to get a really good idea of the Borrelia species there, we use a test called the Felix test, PHELIX, from Red Labs or in Belgium, okay? And so what they're looking for is both the Borrelia DNA directly with the PCR and the bacteriophage of Borrelia's DNA. And that's the virus that infects Borrelia, okay? And that's kind of geared around that research paper I was talking about earlier. And so they're with their research, the accuracy goes way up, and they also recommend doing some pre-testing procedures, which I always have patients do before any microbial test, is like a sauna or exercise or deep tissue massage to get it out of the tissues and into circulation. But that test is pretty good. I find good accuracy with that. I also use DNA connections test, which is it's another PCR type test looking for genetic material. Those are good ones to kind of give you a general idea. There's some more broad spectrum ones looking at like IgG and IgM responses, but the truth is you need a panel. If you don't know you have it and you're trying to discover, you're going to need a panel. You're going to want to do ELISA, an ELI spot, a Western blot, probably a PCR, and you're going to want to hit the gamut of co-infections as well to try to get a real idea of what's going on.
Beautiful. All right. And for those of you who may not have been on these calls before or do not know, we also do type up some notes. So I know that Dr. Hart's covered a lot of ground today and just mentioned some very specific tests and places to look for resources. So know that next Tuesday, when that video gets posted, we'll also be posting some notes from today that will include the names of those things. So if you're struggling to kind of keep up or take notes, just know that we'll share those resources with you as well. And thank you for your questions. We have another one. Any thoughts on frequency-specific microcurrent for Lyme?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great resource. Microcurrent, it's technically another thing in that same, electromagnetic light spectrum. And if you hit it on the, if you hit the right frequency on the nail on the head, it's fantastic. I've seen it work great for inflammation for patients. I've seen it work wonderful for calming the nervous system down. I've seen it work really well for tissue repair. I've seen some patients heal fractures in the bones 2 to 3 times as fast as usually medically standard when using microcurrent. And so you can also use it if you're getting the right frequencies to hit the Lyme directly, right? Because Borrelia, just like everything else in the universe, is just off-putting a certain frequency. And so if you counteract that frequency, it's going to disrupt it. And so you have to watch out for the Herxheimer reaction after that full inflammation. But you can, if you hit the right frequency, you can use that as well.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Another question, can the Herxheimer effects continue many years after medication as Lyme is still being quote unquote cleared?
Yeah, so, there's still the inflammatory response afterwards. There's still the damage that was done. If the damage was never healed, that's a big one. There's also, pain gets mapped into the nervous system. Okay, pain, inflammation, all that gets mapped into the nervous system. And so the body learns as a defense mechanism because pain, inflammation, Herxheimer response, those are all actually the body responding, trying to respond in an intelligent way. Okay, so Herxheimer response is actually an inflammatory response from your immune system. Okay, and so it's trying to respond into an intelligent way to a big threat. Okay, and so to get more efficient, our body's all about efficiency. The brain maps these pathways. Well, if you never demap them, if you never reprogrammed it, part of the problem, and I see this in 90+% of my patients, is that the neurological system is still thinking there's a threat, even if the threat is gone. So amongst healing the tissues and clearing the Lyme and dealing with the inflammation and supporting the nutrients, you have to start remapping the brain. So that might look like DNRS, it might look like neurofeedback, it might look like Feldenkrais hands-on manual therapies or physical therapy with a well-trained who's chronic illness, Lyme informed, to start to remap some of these pathways is going to be big as well.
Can you just quickly articulate DNRS as an acronym you mentioned? What is that?
Yeah, dynamic neuro retraining system. I think if I got that right, it's basically a limbic system retraining. So your brain has, in the middle of your brain, there's a support system that scans for threats and it creates a response to those threats. But when you're in chronic illness, you're in threat all the time, right? The threat, Lyme disease, is inside of you, and so the threat's in you. And so the limbic system is responding all the time to this constant threat. And so it learns to do that at the smallest of threats. And so it over-responds. And so DNRS is a way to dampen down that back to normal so you don't hyper-respond to small threats.
Beautiful. Thank you. Additionally, new question. Can you say more about hyperbaric chamber for Lyme? You mentioned this in your talk, but can you elaborate on the benefits and how that works?
Yeah, so essentially what it's doing is it's inputting a lot of oxygen in the system and applying pressure to drive that oxygen in the cells. So on one level, that's antimicrobial, and I've seen it great for neurological infections for some of those optic neuritis cases. As long as the pressure doesn't make the eye pressure worse or anything, then it's really great for neurological aspects with Lyme disease. And it's very tissue healing. The medical community uses it a ton for wounds that don't like to heal, but it works for any tissue that doesn't heal well, right? So any damage that's done, any inflammation in the body, the hyperbaric chamber works to heal that. So I've seen a lot of good results with general healing, but especially neurological cases doing repeated bouts of the hyperbaric oxygen chamber. It's a really, a lot of times there's ones you can rent, but that's kind of pricey. But a lot of times you can buy, a package of 10 or 12 sessions from maybe a hospital around you or somebody, an office or a doctor has a chamber you can buy some sessions from. It's a great option.
Wonderful. All right, Dr. Hart, I'm going to welcome our audience. If you have any last minute questions, to go ahead and input them. Again, if you are not yet familiar with the Biologix Center for Optimum Health in Tennessee, please go ahead and we can find some information about them on our site, but certainly far more on their site as well. Dr. Hart, I know apart from Lyme, you guys specialize in the treatment of antihistamine related disorders and dysregulation. Is there anything else, that you guys are working on today that you would wish to talk about or make the audience aware of?
Yeah, we do a lot of mold cases, autoimmune, mast cell, histamine, Lyme, of course, parasites, and a lot of neurological disorders. But we see a lot more of the pediatric cases of like autism and pandas and supporting their bodies and dealing with those things.
Great. All right. I'm going to plug that next month we are featuring Dr. Jeff Drobot from the American Center of Biological Medicine in Arizona and Lauren Slater, who's a nurse from the Biomed Center New England. They'll be speaking on restoring hormonal balance to the body and different methods for doing that and the importance of that, not just for women, is maybe more commonly thought of, but also for men. And so we hope you'll join us for that. All right. Before we go, though, all right, the whole office has been overwhelmed by incredible fatigue, loss of cognition. I'm surprised I even got through today. Just not feeling good. Granted, we have these clouds of pollen like rolling through our area of New England. Can we, are these related? Because we're hoping they are, and we're not just all going crazy at the exact same time. Can you say a little about
we all feel like we're in like a dream state a little bit, like a
uncomfortable
altered universe. Help us
Usually
out.
I don't go right to the mass psychosis idea. I usually start somewhere else first, try to see what's in the environment if multiple people are dealing with it. I mean, pollen is making a ton of sense right now anyways, because a lot of the areas are getting hit with it. And I think both of our sides are more towards the East Coast right now. And so that's a huge one. I would say, what I find really helpful for that, and anything anti-inflammatory is that's also antihistamine. So enzymes on an empty stomach, curcumin is going to be great. Stinging nettle tea, fantastic. And then I would always encourage somebody to add in some extra toxin binders. It's just a great way to cover your bases. And even if it's not a toxic problem, taking that burden off the body allows it to deal with the inflammation better.
Great. I will say that I am still very much in the early part of my learning about all of these things. So my instinct after hearing all that and feeling quite desperate in my own situation would be to reach out, based in New England, to maybe Jamie Dufresne at the Biomed Center New England. Jamie is a wealth of knowledge about the type of supplementation that Dr. Hart just spoke about. So if you are feeling as desperate as I am and not really sure where to go, you might start there. Hopefully you have some additional resources around you. But if any of you are like us here, this pollen needs to stop. We need some rain. So we can all put maybe some rain in the vortex today. It is awful. You guys have it where you are as well, Dr. Hart?
Oh yeah, especially kind of being in the valley of the hills of Tennessee, it accumulates for sure.
Not very fun. Well, listen, this was fun. Thank you so much for joining us. And I believe we have another of your colleagues joining us a few months from now. I think in August, but don't hold me to that. I'll have to check my calendar. We always appreciate your time and in your insight. And again, if anyone has any additional questions, last thing I'll say is I believe that Biologix does offer a free consultation for those who are experiencing disease and wish to speak with a provider. Is that, or potentially work with a provider? Is that right, Dr. Hart?
Yeah, you can call in and get more information. We were doing consultations with one of the doctors. I'm not sure I don't do those typically unless it's a really major case. But the patient care coordinators will be able to take care of you.
Beautiful. Okay. Wonderful. And if you need help getting in touch, you can always reach us here at the Marian Institute. Thank you again. And I wish everyone a really wonderful afternoon.
Thank you guys.